Alright, welcome. So today we'll be making, like the last tutorial on Notes app, except this time we're going to be using the MERN stack. So we're going to be utilizing MongoDB, Express, React, and Node.js. And the biggest difference between this Notes app and the last Notes app is the fact that if you refresh the page, the Notes page, all the notes that you've already previously created are still going to be there. So I just called it this note, and it's still there, and if I refresh, it's still there. And the reason is when I create it, it creates it and it sends it to the database that I've already created, and it goes, and when I go to the notes page, it takes it from the database and it shows it. And that's why if you refresh the page, there's going to be like a little loading for a second, and then it gets it from the database. And another feature I added is if you click on the note, there's something, I created a little note page. So this is where you can edit the note. So I can call this the note, and I can fix my spelling mistake. I can call this the note, and I press update note, and it automatically updates it, and it sends it to the database, and it takes it back again. And I can also delete the note. So if I press delete note, it's gone, and if I refresh, it's still gone. Alright, so the prerequisites you're going to need to know before this is you're going to need to know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, just like the last tutorial. You're also going to need to know some React, so I'm not going to be teaching you React in this tutorial, and Mongoose, Express, and Node.js. If you know them, that would be better, since I'm not really going to be going into depth in the explanation. This is going to be more of a follow-along than a tutorial. I will be trying to explain some things, but for the most part, I'm just going to be showing you how to put it all together. So if you know Mongoose, Express, and Node.js, that would probably make it easier for you to understand what's going on. But then again, it's optional. I'm also been using React Bootstrap. If you don't know that, no problem. It's just to style the website. And that's basically how I did like all those this nav bar and the text in that font and stuff like that. All right. Without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create the folder that we're going to be inside for this tutorial. So I'm going to be making it from scratch. I'm not going to be building off my last tutorial, just because we're going to have to remove a lot of the functionality to make space for the backend anyway, so I think it's just better to just make it from scratch. So we're going to go into documents, and I'm going to do mkdir for make directory, and I'm going to call this notes MERN. Alright, and we're going to go inside that. And inside here, I'm going to create my React app. So npx create React app, and I'm going to call this Frontend. Since we're going to have a Frontend folder, and everything else is just going to be the backend, so I want everything in the Frontend to be inside the Frontend folder. Alright, now that's done, we're actually going to open the folder that we just created. So I think it was called Notes MERN. So I created it in my documents. Alright, once you open that, you're going to have a little Notes MERN thing. You're going to have the front-end folder, and in the front-end folder, you're going to have your source, your public, and your gitignore, your package.json files. So in the source, we're going to delete a few files. We're going to delete our index.js, apptest.test.js, the logo, report web vitals, and setup tests. These are all kind of bloatware. We don't really need them. So we're just going to keep these three files inside our source, and the gitignore we're also going to keep, because if you ever want to upload it to GitHub, you're going to need that. So in the app file, we're going to delete everything inside here, and actually we're just going to create a div. Okay, and we don't have the logo anymore, so we can't import that. And in index, we're not going to use report web vitals. And we don't have React strict mode anymore. Okay, and we don't have this. And index.css, it doesn't exist anymore. And there we go. That should be good. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to install all the dependencies in the front-end folder. So let me just go inside the front-end folder. And the dependencies we're going to install, and the only one you guys need to install, is React Router DOM, since we're going to be using the React Router. All the other dependencies are just a style, so I'm going to use Bootswatch, React Bootstrap, and React Router Bootstrap. So the only one you actually need to install is React Router DOM. The rest are just a style. You can follow along with me with these if you want to. So I'm going to click enter. Alright, now we're going to start creating our application. So in the source folder, I'm going to create a file called context.js. So in this tutorial, we're going to be using the context API. And the context API is very, very similar to Redux. So if you've ever heard of Redux or if you've ever used it, it's very similar to that. It's a bit more simpler. So Redux is used for more heavy applications, but for our Notes app, I think context is all we're going to need to use. Last tutorial, I could have used context, but I wanted to keep it as simple as possible. But this tutorial, I want to introduce it. So to start off context, we need to do const. We need to set a variable to. Actually, the first thing we need to do is we need to import create context and React. We need to also import React from React. Okay, and we are going to do const context equals create context. Okay, and on top of this, we are going to create a function called context provider. And I'll explain what this does in a sec. So we're going to call this context provider, and we're going to pass down children inside here, and we are going to return a tag context dot provider, which is going to take a value of an object, like that. And in here we're going to have children. And the last thing I'm going to do before I explain what's going on here is I'm going to go inside the index.js, and I'm going to import the context provider from context. Actually, I don't think I exported it. No, I didn't. So we're going to export this, and I'm also going to export this context down here. So I'm going to export this as a default. The difference between a default export and a normal export is for a normal export you don't have to put it in wrap it in curly braces, but for a default export you don't have to wrap it in curly braces, but for a normal one you have to, because the default automatically takes it from the file, while the normal one it takes it by the name. So for the index.js, we are going to import our context provider, so we have to wrap it in curly braces since it wasn't a default export. We're going to import it from /context.js, and we're going to wrap our app component in context provider. So we're going to take this app like that, save, and there we go. Okay, so basically I'm going to try to explain this as best as I can. So the way context works is, normally if you didn't have context, if you wanted to pass state down from a parent component to a child component, you have to do it through props. And that's okay if you have like one parent and one child. But if you have a parent that has a child, that has a child, that has a child, and you want to pass down from the first parent to the last child, you're going to have to pass it down through each file all the way down. And that's a lot of boilerplate code, so it doesn't really look good, and you have to pass it down through multiple files just for it to work in the one file that you need it to be in. And for example, if you want to pass it into a child from one branch to a child in another branch, you have to give it all the way up to the parent and then pass it down that way. And that's just a lot of boilerplate code that is not necessary. So context solves that, and Redux, but I'll explain what context is first. Context is an external file that you use to import the things that you need from context. So the way we export what we need from context is, let's just say I want to export, I don't know, a variable called number. I'm going to set this to 1. I'm just going to go over to the value that I created, and I can export without the, I can export number, like that. And then whenever I want to go and whenever I want to import it, I can just go over here and I can import. First of all, I have to import context from /context, and I also have to import. Use context, the use context hook from React. And right here, what we do is we do const, and we set this to number. So we actually have to destructure it. So we're going to go const. We're going to destructure it right from the number, and we're going to destructure it from the use context hook. And in the use context hook's parentheses, we're going to put in context like that. So basically, what this does is we're using the context of context.js, and in context.js, there's a context.provider, and over here, this is kind of like a context.consumer. But instead of using context.consumer for functional components, we just use context, which is a bit simpler. So we just import we just destructure the number from here, and we do the use context. And that way, we can get anything we want from context to any file in this application without having to pass it down all the way from the grandparent, all the way down to the grandchild. This way, we can just have an external file. So whenever we want to import any variable or any function that is used in 2 different or 3 different files, we just put it inside the context file, and we can use it anywhere. So I'm just going to delete all this since it's kind of unnecessary. The reason we wrap index.js in the context provider is so that we can use the context anywhere inside the app component. And the reason we have children here is to show, so we destructure children from the context provider. And inside whenever we use the context provider component, we're actually outputting the app. So what this is really outputting here is just outputting the context provider. And normally, if we didn't put the children down, it wouldn't even output the app. It would just show the context provider, which is actually nothing without something to show the information. It's just JavaScript. So what the children does is we destructure children from the function, and we show it down here. So it's basically saying have the value and pass it down to whatever is inside the context provider. And what is inside the context provider is the app. So it's going to pass it down to every single thing inside the app whenever it is being imported, like we did previously. Alright, we're going to get back to context, and we're going to use it later. But for now, I'm going to create the components folder. And inside that folder, I'm going to create a file called header.js. So I'm just going to create all my my navbar and all my pages right now. And I'm not really going to explain any of this, nor am I actually going to type out this code. I'm just going to copy paste it from the React Bootstrap website. You can do this yourself, or you can watch my last tutorial on how to do the front end. I focus more on the front end, but on this tutorial I'm going to focus more on the back end. Okay, and this is the header.js. So we have a container wrapping all the stuff inside here just to center it, and then the navbar I copy pasted from React Bootstrap, and the link container. So this is important. So if you don't want to use link container, you can just use the link tag from the React router DOM. But I use a link container from React Router Bootstrap, and this allows me to use the Bootstrap styles while having the React Router DOM functionality. So this is important. So these are the links in the navbar. So this is going to link to slash, and this is going to link to slash notes, and this is going to link to slash create every single time we click one of these 3. I'm going to create my screens. So I'm going to create my screens folder, and inside that screens folder, let me drag that out to the source, yeah. And inside that screens folder, I'm going to create my create.js, my home.js, and my notes.js. So inside the home.js, we're just going to have a container that's going to wrap an h1 and a paragraph tag. So I'm just going to copy paste this, and there we go. So we're just importing a container from React Bootstrap. And for the create page, for the notes page, we're just going to have an empty div for now, since we're going to use the functionality once we create the database in the backend. And for our notes page, or sorry, for our create page, we are going to use a controlled component. So that means whenever we type something inside one of the inputs, it's gonna upload it to state, so we can use it inside one of the notes. So now I'm going to go back inside context.js, and I'm going to start creating the functionality for my notes, for my create page. So I'm going to create a function called handle change, and I'm going to have an event, and I'm going to destructure the name and the value, and we're going to create it right after this. I just want to create the functionality first. Destructure the name and the value from event.target, and we're going to set our note. So we actually have to create a use state. We have to create a state right now. We're going to create it inside the context, and we're going to import it from the context to the create.js. So I'm going to set this to note, set note, and I'm going to have this have a default value of an object which has a title and text, like that. And I'm going to set this note to a arrow function, which is going to have a parameter of previous value. And it's going to return an object, sorry, not parentheses. It's going to return an object, and that object is going to have all the previous values with an ellipsis, also known as the spread operator, and whatever the name was, and setting the name to whatever the value is. And this is called two-way data binding. So we're going to go over to our create.js. I'm going to do RAFCE. So this is an extension I downloaded. It automatically just makes a file for us. And I'm going to import a few things from React Bootstrap just to make our form. So I'm going to import a form and a container from React Bootstrap. So I'm just going to copy paste from here to there. And I'm also going to import our context and use context, like that. And inside here, I'm going to import a few things from the use context. Actually, first I have to export it, since I didn't export it down in the value. So I'm going to set this to an object, and in this object we're going to have multiple things. So we're going to have our note and a handle change function, and inside our create we're going to destructure those handle change note. We're going to destructure those, and we're going to set it to use context, like that. And inside here, we're going to, actually this part I'm just going to copy paste. So there we go. We have all our forms here. So we have a form label, so that's just the label of the thing. And inside the input, we have our onChange. We set that to the handle change, which we imported from the use context. And our value, we set it to the note.title. And we set the name of this to title. And we set the class name to form control, which applies the React Bootstrap styling. And the same thing down here, except we set it to note.text. We set the name to text, so that way when we go over to context and when we use these the name, it's going to go event.target.name. So whatever that name was that we set over here, it's going to put that name right here, and it's going to set that to the value, which is note.text. So it's going to set text to note.text. So it's going to set this text to whatever the note.text is, and the note.text is this note.text, and that creates a two-way data binding. So whenever we type something inside the state, it's going to set this state to that. Okay, and the last thing we're going to do is we're going to add the routing functionality, so we can just route between the three pages. So I'm going to go over to app.js, and I'm going to import. Actually, first thing we need to go over to index.js. And we need to import our browser router. I'm going to import it as router, and we're going to import this from React router DOM, and we're going to wrap our app with it. Like that, over in app.js. Now we can import our switch and our route from React router DOM. And inside here we can have our, actually first thing we need to import our header. So I'm going to import that. So it's going to do an auto import like that, and I'm also going to have our switch, and inside here our route, and we're going to set the route exact path to slash. Explained why in the last video, because the way React Router works is it tracks everything after the slash, so anything that starts with a slash is going to track that, but exact makes sure that it only tracks what the slash is. And inside here we're going to have our home like that, and over here we're going to have this to notes, and we're going to import our notes page like that. And lastly, we're going to have our create. So I'm going to set the path equal to /create. And we're going to auto import this create inside here. Looks like we have an error here. So in create.js, it says context is not exported. Oh, because I exported it as a default. So actually I have to take away the curly braces. And right now this should work. Alright, there's also another bug on app.js. Home. Apparently imported it as home. Okay. With the capital O, but that should work. Alright, so now let's look at this in the browser. Refresh the page. And I forgot to import bootswatch, that's why there's no styles. So I need to import this line. And so it's going to be the bootswatch /dis/lux. Lux is the theme, so you can change this to all the themes that they have on the bootswatch website, which will be linked in the description below. So you can use the Lux theme. There's also another theme called Journal. I'm going to use the Lux theme. I always use that theme because, I don't know, I like the style. So now, if we view this in the browser, and there we go, we have our Notes app, and this looks similar to the last one. And in the create, we can type stuff in, and it might look like anything special. It really isn't, but the thing we know is that it is being updated in state. So that's it for this tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed it. So in the next tutorial, we're going to be talking about how to create the database using MongoDB Atlas. And we're going to be starting to add some of the functionality to the front end and start linking the front end to the back end. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.